and welcome to another edition, the silver anniversary of Carnivore Bites, Carnivore Radio. 250 shows, Dr. Lopkin. Quite
Yes,
an achievement.
it
Your
is.
reflection, your thoughts, my friend, and we're going to get into our thoughts in terms of what's transpired over the last 5 years, but your just thoughts on the show's evolution, so on and so on. I'll leave it up to you. You
Well,
talk
I
about what
a-
you want to talk about.
I actually went through my records and found a couple of dates. We're talking about 250 episodes of Carnivore Bites. That
That's
doesn't
correct.
that doesn't include the long form carnivore podcast we did, the terrestrial radio we did. So, just to give you a couple of dates, August 6th, 2010 was the first time I appeared on what was then the Business Buzz as a guest. December 9th, 2011, I joined the Business Buzz as a co host.
Yep,
March 2nd, 2018,
deservingly so.
March 2nd, 2018, we changed the format of the Business Buzz to Carnivore Radio.
Which I have to interject, freaked out I'm putting it in quotes, the free thinkers at Wesleyan University, because, all fairness, our show was basically a outgrowth of Wesleyan University. It was their college radio station. We probably were the number one show. Am I overstretching that, Lopkin?
No, not at all.
Not even close.
We were certainly getting the most calls of any show on their air.
And to put it in perspective, hold on. We had, and you were a big part of it, along with Chris Calandra, that I think we were getting calls, even though it was a smaller station, that larger stations, like in our heyday, TIC was, and we were getting like 6-7 calls an episode. Am I not correct?
Yes, we were. And you mentioned Chris Calandra. Let's not forget Marty Keene, who was with us at the time.
No
and then
question.
so March 2nd was our first terrestrial carnivore radio. 3 days later, March 5th, 2018, was the first Carnivore Bites podcast.
Now, I have to have you reflect on our firing from terrestrial radio. And I was really kind of, because I'm a sensitive guy, believe it or not, I was really kind of a little bummed out about that. But again, it gets into the whole transformation of America, that Wesleyan, probably in the 60s and 70s, was the echo center of free speech and expression. And my God, has that changed? They were out for us well before we got fired, correct?
Oh, yes. But hang on 1 second. Let me pull up another date. It was November 11th, 2016. So a good year and a half before we switched to Carnivore Radio, that we left the station and were greeted by a sign calling us Nazis.
And racist, I believe.
Yes.
And that's, again, the whole, with no basis. I mean, come on, really. I think we're pretty fair, and we're hardly racist, but man, that's ridiculous, especially both of us being Jewish. Hello. Yeah, I thought it was hysterical. Remember, I think it was Chris Calandra, Marty Keena, and you. We left the station, and we got the sign.
Yep, the sign was posted where we would see it when we left the studio. It was absolutely amazing. And of course, let's not forget that during the period right before the terrestrial radio show was canceled, we found out that the transmitter for the station hadn't been working. So
I think that is that is, I say, one of the funniest things, as the station now looks for donors, whatever. But I thought that was hysterical, because I'm very, I always look for why I screwed up in some way. And remember, we're doing the show, it's kicking ass, We're getting 6 callers, 8 callers an hour, which is amazing. People listening to us like driving farther than I thought the station could broadcast, saying, "Hey, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I'm on my way to Philadelphia." Remember that call?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden we got no calls. I'm like, God, we kind of suck because I'm very like, self-deprecating. I always think, well, how did I screw up?
Right.
And
We
then
were
all of a sudden
trying
we
to
learned that no, the
we were
antenna was
trying to
down.
figure out what we had done wrong because we were doing the same things.
Same thing,
And,
exact, and
and
heating up.
and all of a sudden we find out that instead of reaching half the state through broadcast, we were reaching about a 5 block area.
Yeah, I would say we were reaching at most 1,000 people.
Yeah.
2,000. I'll give you 2,000.
And the
Just for
station
yucks.
could yes, and the station couldn't afford to have the transmitter tower fixed.
And how happy were they when we left unceremoniously? They probably had a party.
Wouldn't surprise me. They were not fans of the show. They did not like free speech. They did not like diversity of ideas. They wanted us to kowtow to what they believed, despite the fact that all the facts that we reported were absolutely accurate and disproved what they wanted us to be saying. And, let me go. I'm willing to bet that in the history of WESU, I am probably the only professional journalist that has ever appeared on that station on a regular basis.
That's probably correct, yes.
So, yes, so I think, all in all, it's worked out well because now we get listeners from all over the country thanks to the podcast. We are
Oh, I have
certainly
no
reaching.
complaints. I think that
Yeah.
sometimes in life you got to get your, ass kicked to things work out, in your behalf. And yeah, I think we traded it was good. While it lasted, it was awesome. But we traded something that's in its decline to something that it's in its evolution, which is podcasting.
Absolutely.
And in fact, to that point, actually, RFK actually commented on that. It said that Trump was the first Twitter president. He's going to be the first podcast president. Very interesting, isn't it?
Okay, I hadn't heard that, but we are on the media list. We are on the media list for RFK's announcements. So let's. I'm going to see if we can get him on.
No, that would be fantastic. And speaking of him, there's been talk about him running as an independent because the Democratic Party will shut him out. I believe that he would not. The only person that could come close to him if he actually got, his initiatives going as an independent would be Ross Perot. I think he would top that. Because people are looking for, you have numbnuts as president, some guy who probably at this point, I haven't seen him in like 3 months, can probably not complete a sentence. And then you have Trump, which I'm completely sick of.
Yeah, a lot of people are. It's part of the polarization of the parties. The far right is pushing the polls for Trump, but the centrist and moderate Republicans, and certainly the independents and moderate Democrats, do not want him in the Oval Office again. And it is interesting because we have not had a serious independent candidate since Ross Perot. And now,
who, by the way, being older than you, I think he got like 20 or 25% of the vote. He would have been even more of a player if he didn't have that meltdown about his daughter's wedding and about UFOs and hello, it's time for a hospitalization. But yeah, even with that, despite that, he got over 20%. RFK is a very compelling figure. He's no dummy, even though the mainstream liberal media try to marginalize him as a vax nutcase. He's not a nutcase in any way. All he talks about is that there's no research on vaccinations, and he's correct.
Right. He has some very good points. I don't agree with him on all of his policies.
No, not at all.
But to be fair, I've never agreed with any presidential candidate on all their policies.
But he has a brain to think for himself.
Yes.
That he Oh,
he
go ahead.
he has access to world leaders just because of his name. He has
Of course.
access to experts that can guide him, which, Trump never availed himself of. And Biden wouldn't know an expert if he bit him in
Well,
the
I think
ass.
that it deserves elaboration, Dr. Lopkin, because that's one of Trump's pitfalls and basically one of his demise of his presidencies is that he always had like Louis from Philadelphia, especially early on, and it was just a disaster. I mean,
Yeah,
his policies were good. He always had B minus players. Let's be honest.
yeah. The big problem was he did not choose his advisors based on their expertise. He chose his advisors on who showed him the proper loyalty and respect.
And I think it's interesting, just like George W. Bush, he realized too late that his inclinations were wrong. I mean, Jeff Sessions was a complete idiot. I don't even know how he got a law degree. Was replaced by Barr, much much more capable. But that's another story. But speaking of Trump, Dr. Lopkin, again, inviting this, he feeds on this. I don't understand it. But now there's an audio. He went on Brett Baer saying that these documents were not in any way top secret or sensitive. And then there's an audio supposedly of him saying the opposite. And then there was a good analysis on the Brett Baer show saying that he's going to reach a point where his legal troubles will interfere with his ascendancy to the Republican nomination. What do you think of that? I believe that's true, by the way.
Well, it's definitely going to interfere, if for no other reason than timing. The prosecution in his classified documents case has already requested a delay from August to December. And they said that's going to give them more time to put their case together. Excuse me, you're the one that indicted him. Why isn't your case together? There was no deadline for you. You had all the time in the world. They're,
I would agree with that, and I think, and my actual opinion is that it was a bullshit indictment, but he didn't help things. That's it in a nutshell, and that's the story of his police. He's become increasingly unglued. And he's the
yeah,
only one I agree with. I think it was Ted Cruz. He's the only one that can lose to Biden
yeah, at
of the
this point,
Republicans. Sorry, it's true.
yeah, it does look like Biden can beat him again. And the fact that
And that
now,
would be the end of this country. It's just
yeah, I don't
yes.
know that I don't know that we could survive another 4 years of
That's
Biden.
what I'm saying. Yes.
I certainly don't think we could survive a partial Biden presidency with Kamala Harris taking over.
Okay, Kamala is something that intrigues me, Dr. Lopkin. You talk about people checking the boxes her entire career. The more I see her, the more this person's got no substance. She's an idiot. I'm sorry to be that blunt. And she's the lowest rated VP in the history of polling.
Yeah,
Crossing party lines. She is a
that
idiot.
blows me away. I never thought we would have advice that made people look forward to Dan Quayle.
Oh, Dan Quayle is a Mensa candidate. He could be a doctoral candidate at University of Pennsylvania. I have no idea how she got I do have an idea, but I'm not going to get into it. How she got a law degree and yada yada yada. This person, when she talks, it's actually the funniest thing ever. I love it. It's great, great TV. Imagine a world without school buses. It's like, oh God, smoke another joint.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the main reason that Biden is in the race is because the Democrats know Kamala Harris cannot win. All a primary candidate, never mind a Republican, all they need to do is run commercials that are clips of her speeches.
That's all you pretty much. Well, doesn't that hold true for Biden? If you had someone else but Trump, just play Biden being Biden. He was at the University of Hartford, where the podcast originates, not University of Harvard, but Connecticut. And he got into, because he was always a nutcase. Like he's got something wrong with his ego about masculinity. He was, now that he has dementia, it's even worse. He's at university and he's like got the tough guy thing. It started with popcorn or corn pop. I mean, this is our president. If it was 30 years ago when you went to a movie, you'd walk out and say it's impossible.
I'm still waiting for somebody to explain why he finished his speech at University of Hartford with "God Save the Queen."
That's what I'm saying. He could not. And talk about RFK Jr., which I like. I would absolutely vote for him. In a debate, they know the Democratic Party, the Democratic Socialist Lewinsky Party, knows that face to face with RFK, it would be who's behind the door, a la the Wizard of Oz. It would be show Biden. I think he's incapable of going mano on mano with anyone, especially RFK, who's a bright person.
Yeah, it is absolutely flabbergasting to me that the Democrats who have RFK in the race, who has, without any support from the mainstream media, garnered 20% of the vote, who 79% of Democrats don't want Joe Biden, and yet the DNC is rigging the primary for Biden because they don't care what the Democratic voters want.
They never did.
They don't
Bernie
care
would have been the president if they didn't rig it. Not that I like the son of a bitch. I don't. But yeah, they screwed him. But the only reason
they
Bernie
screwed
didn't protest because he never wanted to be president. He never had a job in his whole life, and he's never made more money. Why would you want to be president?
Yeah, they rigged the primary against Bernie, but quite frankly, Bernie never had a prayer of winning a general election.
100% agreed. But they still did rig it.
Yes.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, speaking of that, the Democratic Party, I grew up with Scoop Jackson and others. And you always allude to the fact of the moderate Democrats. It's my only bone of contention with you, Dr. Lopkin. But when you talk about a retrospective of the show in the 5 years that we've been doing this, 250 episodes, that I've seen the Democratic Party evolve or disevolve from left leaning, and it's not all that bad, but pro American to in some ways, anti American, certainly anti Israeli, and I would even get you anti Semitic party. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it is amazing over the 250 episodes, the changes we've seen in the parties. The Democrats took a hard left. There used to be strong moderate Democrats. I mean, Joe Manchin a couple of years ago was a great example of that. He was a strong moderate Democrat.
And personally, and wait, hold on before you go on there. I love your points. I do. Is that he was indicative of probably somewhat where the party was. Now he's an outliner.
Yeah, him, Kirsten Sinema. These were the mainstream Democrats. And then the left took over, the squad took over. And I honestly believe the reason the Democratic Party has, and I specify the party, not the voters, the party kowtowed to the squad because they think social media is real. They think what's on social media is an indicator of the country, and it isn't. And it never has been.
Well, I would have to say one thing I would like your comment on. Again, it disturbs me as a Jewish American why you have Chuck Schumer, Blumenthal, the list goes on. They're basically silent as this evolution or de-evolution happens. I really am perplexed.
Oh, I don't think it's that perplexing. They're silent because they saw the wackos on the far left primary moderate Democrats. And in a couple of cases, they won. These people don't, Schumer, Blumenthal, especially Blumenthal, they don't care about their constituents. They don't care about America. All they want is their job. And whatever
And
they
their
do,
limelight. He's never met
yes,
a camera he does not like.
yes. And I mean, quite frankly, this is about they want to keep their jobs, they want to keep their power. These people have made fortunes by being in office.
A la Nancy Pelosi went into office years ago, worth a couple $100,000. Now she must have be even though she's a so-called socialist. Again, it's not as I do. It's not what I do. It's what I say. And now she's worth what $10 million. Oh, gee, surprise, surprise. How does that happen? Could you explain to our listeners how that happens? You're the
Again,
socialist, not you, but
these
her. She's a socialist, and all of a sudden she's worth 10 mil.
well, that's something that I find absolutely hysterical. The socialists are really big on making sure that you're against capitalism. But Bernie Sanders made a fortune in book publishing. You know, they're really quick selling access to their speeches. They're real quick to use capitalism when it benefits them. And of
Isn't that
course,
indicative of the Politburo, though? If you're
it
in
is.
communist Russia a la 1970, the rest of the people live like shit waiting in line for a half pound of brisket. And if you're in that, elitist governmental class, you got everything. You got it going on, dude.
Absolutely. And of course, if the average American had suddenly started making millions of dollars and failed to pay taxes, they would have been thrown in jail. They wouldn't have gotten a sweetheart deal. They certainly wouldn't have had the Department of Justice slow down the investigation and let the statute of limitations expire on 2 years of taxes on this money. But
Oh
that's
no, there's
exactly
no
what just
question with it.
happened to
You're
Hunter
talking about the
Biden.
Hunter Biden.
Yes,
Yeah, and also as a crackhead, even though he's a crackhead, he basically, and then the media now is just talking, oh, he was a druggie. He was a pretty savvy business person, basically laundering money, getting bribes, putting it back, and then them loaning him money so he wouldn't have to pay tax. That's pretty sophisticated for a toothless crackhead, which he was.
it is. And
Maybe Biden's brother had something to do with that. Biden's
may,
so stupid he couldn't, but maybe
maybe
Biden's brother.
Maybe. But you're also seeing not just the polarization of the political class, but the polarization of the media. And we talked about this back during the business buzz about how the media was basically an echo chamber that people were just getting the information they wanted to hear. Now, just this week, the New York Times verified what the IRS whistleblower had said about the Department of Justice hindering the Hunter Biden investigation. And how did they report it? They buried it on page 21. It
Well,
deep
that's one
into
of
the
the sad
article.
things, and I think that has huge implications, ramifications for America. You had again, I think we talked about it. You talked about it last week, but Walter Cronkite was a liberal. You didn't know it until he declared Vietnam over with, and whatever. Many people would say the same thing, but now we don't have that. We have basically an arm of the Democratic Party, and you had that with CNN. We had hopes that it would get back to some degree what it was, but you basically had a liberal coup in spite of the business matrix that were involved or the lack thereof. They basically said, no, we need to be a liberal arm of the Democratic Party in spite of the fact that we only have 250,000 viewers a la Anderson Cooper.
It's actually even worse than that. It's not even about them being an arm of the Democratic Party, which is certainly part of it. It's the fact that we do not have journalists anymore. The Atlantic used to be a respected magazine. And in the latest issue, they have an article where one of their columnists is whining about the fact that there are too many choices in the supermarket. He can't handle it. He went to get orange juice and saw all of these types and all of these brands, and it overwhelmed him. So he had to walk out of the supermarket without buying the juice. How pathetic is this? You
It's
have
beyond
people.
pathetic.
First,
But
first
how
of
does
all,
it happen?
right. First of all, you've got the guy writing the article who I'm sorry, if you can't decide what kind of orange juice you want, you're not intellectually capable of writing an article. Then
There you go.
you
Or
have the
emotionally
editor.
capable. If that
Yes.
if that freaks you out about if it's Tropicana or the store brand, you really need to get out of anything and just go back to your mother's basement because you're
And then
incapable of marriage or anything that involves adult thought.
but on top of this, you've got the editor who looked at this article and went, "Yeah, we'll put it in." Really? This was garbage. And this is what they're putting. It's not about journalism anymore. It's about clickbait. It's about getting people to click on the article and serve up a whole bunch of ads online. That's all this is. And
I
they
think it's
know.
actually deeper than that. I think it started with All the President's Men, the movie in 1976. You could laugh, but you could say
No,
that's when these people came of age. They were watching this shit, and it was activism. Okay, it was
yes.
liberal activism. I'm not condoning what Nixon did, but that's what we did. So we got the professors now. They all are 50, 60 now. Okay, and that's what we have. So you got basic journalists, you could call them that, and that's only just I don't know how you even do that. But these are not journalists; they're activists, and I encourage any of our listeners to go to YouTube and get like 1980 election, the results coming in. You would be floored. It's like a frog in water because it's been 50, 40 years of this stuff going on. So you lose consciousness of how bad it really is. But you have I don't know, NBC, basically you watch them and it's pretty down the middle. That's not you have Martha Raddatz in 2016 crying over Trump's victory. It's not the same. It ain't exactly your
No,
father's Walter Cronkite.
it's not the same, and you do make a good point. And I've actually talked about this. Woodward is the core of what is wrong with journalism because journalists looked at him, saw he took down the president. Now, that wasn't what he had intended to do. Woodward and Bernstein were following a story, and it ended up taking down Nixon, but they didn't say, well, let's write a story that's going to take down the president. They were doing their jobs. Woodward, however, did that. Now, if you for those of our listeners that are too young to remember Woodward and Bernstein, Woodward was an inexperienced journalist at the time. He was relatively new. He was partnered by the Washington Post with Bernstein because Bernstein had the experience and he needed to be reined in that way. Well, after the story, Bernstein went on and he was a journalist. Woodward used it to publish books, to become a minor celebrity. And that's what journalism students at the time saw. They saw, oh,
100%.
look, We
that is at the root cause,
we can
100%.
take down politicians, and we can make a fortune. We can
And it
become
gets at the
celebrities.
academic level too, Dr. Lopkin, is that then you had professors, let's say before Woodward slash Bernstein, saying you need to, the goal of a good journalist is to be, even though you have liberal or conservative inclinations, is to bury that and be objective. That went out the window. Now you have proactive, liberal, I'll use the term journalism, that's very loosely.
Yeah, well,
They're
you
activists.
also, yes, you also had the switch in the education system that we saw in the late 60s and 70s, because that's when the liberals became professors. They came of age, and they didn't really want to go out and get jobs. They wanted to stay in school. So they went into becoming professors. And this is when you saw the professorial class that hadn't had outside experience. They weren't teaching from their experience anymore. They were teaching from the textbook. And you had that liberal class from the 60s become educators and then teach the next generation to become educators and push this liberal agenda. There's a great book about
No,
this,
no, what
Rules
you
for
say is
Radicals.
profound. Sorry to interrupt. That's profound because with experience, it tampers and you become more in touch with reality. You are 100% correct. You have perpetual students now teach. They've never been tempered by the real world experiences, real world assessments, and it's all basically bullshit. Sorry, it's true.
Exactly. And now the educational system is so ingrained in this. I had, I overheard a conversation. I used to teach under a program at Wesleyan, but it wasn't for Wesleyan students. It was for the community. It was an after school program for elementary school kids. And I, as a writer, was teaching kids how to write. Well, I happened to overhear a conversation where they were deciding what the salaries were going to be for the next semester. And I actually heard them say the line, well, we can't pay them that much because then they'd be making as much as real teachers. We were the ones, everybody in this program was a professional who had actually was actually doing in the real world what they were teaching. But Wesleyan didn't want us considered teachers. The teachers had no experience in what they were teaching. They were simply teaching what they were taught from a textbook.
Well, let me elaborate on that for someone that teaches college or teaches at the college level. I think it's hysterical because you can be a biologist, a professor of biology. A cell in the classroom or outside the classroom is the same thing, right? But if you actually are going to teach business, journalism, anything that has real world ramifications, if you've never done it, then basically your opinion is basic bullshit. I mean,
Well,
if you're a business professor and you've never been in business, you have no right teaching kids business because you haven't done jack shit. How does
right,
that
but
sound?
that's absolutely right. But it's even worse than you're saying, because you said, biology is the same in and out of the classroom. Apparently, it isn't anymore, because there is a case in court right now of a college professor who was fired. He was teaching biology, and he was fired for saying gender is determined by an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, and that you need a male and a female to give birth. He was fired for that scientific truth. He's now suing the college. But yet
And
now,
actually, I stand corrected. 10 years ago, I'd be 100%.
yes,
I would defend my position because I am correct. But you are correct. I'm sorry to say
yes,
because
now,
it's infused. Liberal sickness has infused itself to every aspect of academia. I would say 10 years ago, I was 100%
No,
correct. I
10
fell
years ago you
outside and
were right.
inside. What's that?
Yes, 10 years ago you would have been right. Now, academia has no relation to reality.
Okay, but when you talk about liberalism, what's the objective? Because I think it went from gay rights that we're all on board with, 100%, no question about it. Now I can't even follow it anymore. There's got to be a reason why. And I think my thought is anything to disrupt the nuclear family, traditional relationships plays into the liberal agenda and ideology because then you need more government. And I'll get back to the Great Society. You had African Americans up against it, real racism, but yet they had less out of wedlock births. They were more church going. I couldn't even imagine being in 1963 and having the strength to do that. Fast forward 50, 60 years later, African American family life, social life is a disaster. No fault of their own. You could not design a mechanism to destroy a culture more than the Great Society did. And it's all about breaking up the family and the role of the father.
Well, yes, because let's face it, if you don't have strong masculine role models, and remember, even before all of the woke bullshit, the liberals came after masculinity. They wanted everybody to be a metrosexual. They wanted to downplay masculinity. Why? Because traditionally, masculinity has been power. It has all been about power. It is going out and doing what you needed to do. And if you give that power to men, that's another audience that's competing with you for your power. And that's the big thing that the left has been all about, gathering their power. They want power, they want influence, they want to control what your kids are learning, what you can say, what you can celebrate, what
How does
you
this
can
end up,
buy.
Dr. Lopkin? Because what you're saying is 100% correct, right on point. Very few media. We'll put ourselves in the media group. We'll say that. Some people like Tucker Carlson will, and you know what happened to him. It's been very effective, hasn't it?
Well, how it
Because
ends?
young
Yep.
men are confused.
Oh
They don't know
yes,
where they stand.
and this is why there is such a push to go. Oh, you're not really a boy. You can be a girl. How confused? Let's face it. No child, no matter what gender, no matter what race, religion, no child has all their shit together. That's part of being a child.
Of course.
No teenager has all of their shit together. They're learning, they're finding out. To be pushed into, oh, you know what you thought you were? No, you don't need to be that. You can be what we tell you. And to go back to your question, how does this all end up? It ends up one of two ways. Either one, there is a massive pendulum swing to the right, and all of this gets wiped away. And then, quite frankly, based on history, the pendulum will swing too far to the right. And then the left will get all upset, but they won't have the power to do anything about it for a while. And we'll try to get that pendulum back to the center. The second is that the pendulum doesn't swing to the right, that the left actually gets their way. And if you really want to see what that looks like, look at the Soviet Union and Russia in the late 80s and 90s.
100%. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, Dr. Lopkin, and looking at even what the corporate response. We had woke corporatism. It's still there. You look at Target, the anti-Semite, anti-Israeli that they are. But you also had Bud Light. Everyone involved in that shit show has been fired, from Bud Light to the ad agents, and deservingly so. And it's not about trans or homophobic. It's what the hell were you thinking, you moron? I wouldn't
Exactly.
hire anyone involved to change my oil. How does that sound?
See, that was it. The Bud Light fiasco happened because the head of marketing for Bud Light was tasked with the job of getting younger consumers. And they decided, oh, look, this trans activist has a lot of followers. Let's send him, her. I don't even know what pronoun to use with McDermott anymore. But let's send this influencer a case of Bud Light. Let them promote it to their audience. The problem was that audience was not an audience for Bud Light. It was out of left field. What they should have been doing is going after younger athletes, younger people in the middle of the country where beer consumption is at its highest.
No, that's why I have a problem with this, Dr. Lopkin. You're a very bright guy. You're absolutely no business. I believe my previous life was in business. I think I was damn good at it. This is blocking and tackling. It's, I'm sorry, it's kind of, you don't pay someone $2 million that doesn't know this shit. That's my point.
Well, no, you're absolutely right with that. This what I'm saying is this had less to do with pushing a woke agenda than the marketing people being so brainwashed by that woke agenda that
And so out of touch.
they did, yes, and so out of touch that they didn't know how to do their job.
The only thing that equates with this is having a radio station and you're broadcasting without an antenna.
Yes.
That's about the only analogy I can. And your number one show is perplexed because there's no callers. But anyway, the nutcase ideology of liberalism that transcends itself even to climate change, which is something I believe in. I believe there is climate change.
Yeah.
But then you look at the reaction of the left, it makes me push back and say, no, it's not about climate change. It's about control. A la Mr. Adams, Mayor Adams, a true genius, basically trying to outlaw, I guess, wood ovens, wood pizza ovens.
Yes, coal and wood burning pizza ovens.
I do not
It's
think,
like,
I'm not a, hold on, I am not a scientist, but I believe the impact on the environment from New York City coal fire pizza ovens is probably close to zero. I'm going on a limb,
yeah,
but I'm being honest.
it's
Yes.
pretty minimal. And
Minimal is zero.
what most people don't realize is that New York City really should not be doing anything in terms of climate change because the carbon output of the city is actually remarkably low, not just because of the area that it takes up, but because New York City has trees along the streets. They have, remarkably for an urban area, incredibly large parks with greenery that absorbs that. Before the subway went off the rails in terms of crime, you had a large percentage of New Yorkers using mass transit. New York City should have been the model that the left was using in terms of urban planning to fight climate change. Of
It does
course
not fit
not.
their agenda. And by the way, I was really good friend. I'm still good friends with a very successful New Yorker. And basically, you're right. The carbon footprint of his family is almost like zero. He drives his car to Connecticut to go to Mystic to go or to the casinos. It's basically zero.
Right.
He goes to work on a mass transit and he comes back on mass.
the vast majority of New Yorkers that own cars use their cars basically once a week. They move the car from one side of the street to the other so that the streets can be cleaned. That is, and I'm not, this is not a joke. That when I lived in New York City, most most weeks that was the only time our car moved from one spot to another so that the street cleaners could come and wash the streets.
How disappointed are you with Mayor Adams? I thought the guy had hope after replacing Devazio, who's basically a moron, and this guy I think is dumber than De Blasio, but maybe more capable.
I
He's
I
dumber. He's
I
more
don't
capable, but he's dumber. This guy's
I I
no
don't
Mensa
know that
candidate.
he's not a Mensa candidate. I don't know that he's dumber than De Blasio. I think even with all of the stupidity that he's done, and there's a lot of it, I think he's still a better mayor than De Blasio. Now,
Well,
let's point out how low that bar is.
I mean that's like an ant might not be able to walk through that, Dr. Lopkin. That's pretty
Yeah,
bad.
you know,
The worst mayor ever.
I mean, this is an abject distortion of reality that what is going on in New York. And again, I was born in New York. I lived in New York most of my life. I loved New York. Now, I don't even want to visit the city. It has
You and
become
about
a
everyone
cess.
else. It used to
Yeah,
be in the. I'll even get back to before basically in the 80s, late 80s. It was a place where people around the world. It was one of the safest cities, best cities in the world. I have zero interest in going to that shithole.
no, and I've actually had this conversation with my wife that part of me still wants to go down there, but Eric Adams may have just killed my whole reason for going down, which was to go back to my favorite pizza place.
Amazing. You're totally amazing and absolutely accurate. Um, we don't know where it's going to end, but I guess the last thing in terms of topics before we go into our little retrospective is, all the hope with Russia right after um, the Iron Curtain collapsed back in the late 80s, early 90s, all gone. Putin, I basically squandered all the chips he had on the table, um, revealed Russia to be basically not even a military power anymore. Your th- your thoughts?
No, it became a house of cards,
House of
and
Cards.
I'm
And let me just
actually
interject one thing. Again, getting reminiscent of past times. 70s into the definitely in the 70s, Russia was a more than formidable power. It could You could make a strong case that it could have taken over Europe. I don't believe that could happen because I think there were scissions inside the power structure and in the military. But now Putin, for all his bravado and so-called gamesmanship, revealed Russia to be really a third-ranked power. And I
yeah,
think it's really indicative of almost Mussolini and Hitler. Hitler being China. I'm not talking about into extreme. I'm talking about the
right.
power base, and Putin revealing him to be Mussolini. Italy is basically nothing.
Yeah,
The
China
whole the whole relationship is basically imploded because basically Russia would just be a thorn in China's side.
yeah, China has been propping up Russia. It is amazing to, and I am absolutely amazed that nobody in the mainstream media has been talking about this. There's been a lot of coverage of the Wagner group attempting a coup. And that's all anybody was talking about with it was, oh, it's an attempted coup. What's going to happen? But nobody is taking into consideration the fact that The Wagner Group is not a politically motivated organization. They're a mercenary army. So why isn't anybody asking the question, who paid for the coup?
Yeah, because they don't want to unveil that. They know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they do know, because there have been talks about cracks in the Russian leadership since Ukraine started. So I don't know that this is outside people trying to, overthrow Putin. If it's folks from inside Russia, which I think is actually more likely, but this
Well, it's a
is
very
a house
dangerous
of
time,
cards.
and all the promise of the falling of the Berlin Wall has been squandered for many reasons, and basically the West has some responsibility in that as well. But now we're back to a very precarious situation, maybe more dangerous than the Cold War, because the Cold War you had two equal superpowers, at least militarily. Now you have a failing power. When you have a fail, oh, you could say, oh, that's great. Russia's no, they got their backs against the wall. They're you never know what could happen, and we'll keep posted on that. Correct, Oscar
Well,
Lofton?
I think it's even more dangerous than that, because during the Cold War, we thought we had two equal superpowers. It turns out that we didn't. Russia was never as strong as we actually thought they were.
100%, yes.
But now you have the Russian superpower, which we know is not a superpower, has nuclear weapons,
Yes.
which by the way, let's remind our listeners that Russia's stockpile of nuclear material was added to by the Obama administration when they allowed Russia to take Iran's enriched uranium. But
Beautiful.
but now you have a desperate nuclear power. You have a true superpower in the form of China, who appears to be willing to prop them up alongside going about their own nefarious schemes. And you have lesser powers like North Korea and
And
Iran
Iran.
that are on the verge of nuke having nukes, and they're lawless. I mean, there is no reasoning with these folks.
And also, you have America being the stewardship of America being led by a valley girl, Kamala, and a basically dementia ridden guy probably doesn't know what day it is. Does he even know what year it is?
Yeah,
I don't know.
anybody that reads the foreign press knows that the world has no respect for America right now, because they have no respect for Biden. They have no respect for Harris. The liberals used to say, and both the political class and the media class used to go, "Oh, the world is laughing at us because of Trump." No, if you read the world press then and you read the world press now, the world had respect for Trump. They might not have liked him, but they
No, you
respect
bring up
him.
the quintessential point. Liberals are so effing stupid. Never confuse likability with results, okay? And all these bullshit about alliances are formed because of expediency. World War II, the Cold War. The alliances come and go. They respect it. They didn't like Trump because he called a spade a spade. They probably love Biden because they're getting everything they want, but they have no respect. So respect and likability are totally disconnected.
Absolutely. And yes, no alliance lasts forever.
That's my
If
point.
that
Their
if that were
expediency.
right, if alliances lasted forever, we'd still be battling Great Britain.
There you go. Well, Dr. Lopkin, it's been 250 episodes. I think our ascendancy is better than and we did a great job, and it was very engaging at WESU, and we had many, many followers. callers, listeners. But I'm more optimistic. What do you think, Dr. Lopkin?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we were on terrestrial radio, we were on an hour a week. We had a
We were
local
the rock
audience.
stars, dude.
We were the rock stars of ESU, no doubt about it. But take a look at what that show has spun off. We have Carnivore Bites every week doing news and analysis. We have Raw Naked Truth, our sister podcast that just reports the news 4 times a week. We have Simply Financial that talks about money from Chris Calandra. The team that came out of Carnivore is now doing podcasts like nobody's business, and every one of those podcasts is growing faster than anything on WESU.
And you know something? We had, because we had a talented group. We really did. And that's why we crushed it. I'll never forget the guy driving to Philly. And I can't believe he got the signal, like I already talked about, obviously. And he's like, I've never heard this. You guys are. I remember, and then the African American guy that used to call us. We were
Yeah,
basically broad in our beliefs, but they just couldn't understand it.
yeah, that we had an incredibly diverse audience that would call in
100%.
women, Caucasians, African American, Hispanics. We had a number of regular callers who were immigrants that wanted to discuss all of these topics with us. We reached across the board, but we didn't do it by kowtowing to the liberal intelligentsia of Wesleyan University.
That basically summarizes it. But I don't really dwell on the past. It was a fun time. I'm more enthusiastic about the future. And Dr. Lopkin, I've enjoyed every moment with you on terrestrial and on our new, well, not really, it's not new anymore.
Not new
250
anymore, but
shows. No, on Carnivore Bites, I think it's exceptional.
I, I
I'm proud to
wholeheartedly
be a part
agree.
of it.
It's been a fantastic run, and I'm looking forward to the next 250 episodes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lopkin. We'll do it again next week.
Absolutely. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Carnivore Radio website, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. I'll see you next week.
We'll see you then.